You're listening to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is all about helping you grow your real estate investment portfolio and live the life you want to live. Come grow with us and join our community at thereiteclub.com. And now your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.
I use assignments all the time, very, very frequent with real estate investors, because most real estate investors, you don't want to delay putting an offer in because you're trying to figure out, am I buying this through a bare trust? Am I buying this in my name or me and my wife's name, or am I buying this in a corporate name? So you don't want to waste time. So just put an offer in whatever name, it doesn't matter. And I always say, just add for assignee. You can put a full-on assignment clause, but I don't even find that that's necessary most of the time. So you just put for assignee as the buyer, and then it gives you the opportunity to assign the contract to whoever you want when the time comes. Actually, the fourplex we're buying next week, we're doing through a joint venture with some friends of ours, and we did the same thing. We put it in one name, and then in the end, we decided to get the mortgage in a different name, so we just assigned it to another person.
And speaking about joint ventures, so is this something you get into, like writing up joint venture agreements? And you mentioned bare trust. Is this something your firm offers as well?
Yes. So I've done quite a few joint venture agreements. It's again, most of the time they're very similar to one another, but I don't have two that are exactly the same. I can't just pop in the names and that's it. Every joint venture is different. Every team decides together how they want to run their project, what their respective investments are going to be, and what that's going to look like. So I do definitely agree that it requires a professional to be involved to make sure that there's no pitfalls, and that, for instance, that you can get out of it if you want to, or what does that look like, or that you maybe don't want somebody to be able to just get out of it, or whatever the relationship is. It needs to be strongly advised that you have a lawyer draft it. And then bare trust is also something I started this relatively recently. I think the conversation started about a year ago on bare trust, and or that I was involved in some discussions, I should say. And I didn't want to suggest it to clients until I had tried it myself. So my husband and I bought 3 buildings with bare trust. This one we're doing as well with bare trust, and it's working out really, really well. And we've sort of ironed out the kinks of what that looks like, so that now I can properly guide my clients to do the same thing.
Can you expand on what a bare trust is and why that would be a benefit?
So a bare trust is when usually an individual will hold the property in trust, meaning, they'll hold the property in trust usually for a corporation or for a joint venture. Usually though, it's for a corporation. A joint venture agreement will provide for the trust relationship right in the joint venture agreement, right? So you'll have a joint venture, so you have 4 joint venture partners, and the property is only in the name of one of the partners because that's the partner that had the easiest time to get the mortgage. Usually that's what we see. Whoever can get the best mortgage with the best terms will usually be the one on title to the property, but that does not give them more of a right to own the property. So there's a difference between the legal owner or registered owner and the beneficial owner. So in this case, partner 1 is the legal or registered owner because their name is on title to the property, but the joint venture is the beneficial owner in proportion of whatever their shares are in the joint venture. So it's a phenomenal tool because you can get so flexible. For instance, some banks will say, well, we will consider it a personal mortgage if you have under a certain number of doors or under a certain amount of the mortgage. And you can leverage that with different banks if you do it in different names. So my husband and I, when we buy a building together, we're going to decide strategically, are we going to put it in your name? Are we going to put it in my name? Or are we going to put it in our corporate name, depending on where we're going to get the best mortgage? And then we do a bare trust agreement. So the bare trust agreement is a few pages long. It's a very, very simple agreement that basically says, I, Milena Cardinal, hold this property wholly in trust for the corporation. Any income belongs to the corporation. Any expense that I incur on behalf of the building will be reimbursed to me from the corporation. And what it does is it establishes this relationship that the building is not mine. I do not own this building. It's only in my name. I hold it in trust. And so there's a lot of advantages to that. One thing though, always make sure your lawyer knows what you're doing, because from 2018 on, we all have to declare to the government in a specific form who the owner of the building is. And if the registered owner is not the same as the beneficial owner, we have to declare that. Otherwise, the bare trust could be invalidated. Very, very, very important that your lawyer acting on your transaction knows exactly what the relationship is. Yes, the advantages. So the advantage is that, for instance, even though this building would be in my name, the corporation would be the one to get the benefit, meaning the income. So I can take advantage of all the tax advantages of having a income in the corporation, but I also get the benefit of having a mortgage that's in my private name. The other advantage is that if eventually you want to transfer that property to your corporation, you can do it without having to repay the land transfer tax, because technically the owner is the corporation already. So there's no real disposition, meaning there's no real sale that occurs at the time that you transfer the building from one to the other. And so those are the main reasons, really. It's tax reasons all around that you would do that. There's a bit of liability reason too. Basically, it's just as if you bought the property in your corporation. So the liability is on the shoulders of the corporation and then protects your personal assets. Even though the building is in your personal name, you still have that protection. Also, another little tidbit, super, super important to have your insurance policy be co-insured in your personal name and the corporate name that is the holder of the beneficial interest of the property.
Excellent. And I've been told this varies. I invest in various provinces. So like bare trusts are a completely foreign concept in New Brunswick, for example, because there you can register a joint venture on the title. But I find it gets a bit messy. I know you practice in Ontario, but have you come across situations from investors from other provinces or heard about stories? Because I've heard people are saying bare trusts are being phased out. Is that true? Or is it what you just said, 2018, you have to register with the government? Or
I actually don't see that as being a problem. I think the only reason why we have to declare that information to the government is so that when you go to transfer the property and you say, well, I don't want to pay land transfer tax, so I'm going to pretend that I held it in trust for the company from day one, that's what it stops to have to declare that information to the government, because they're going to turn around and say, no, you said that you were the sole beneficial owner upon the time that you bought the property. So I don't think it stops doing bare trust. I think it just, it sort of emphasizes that decision has to be made from the start. Otherwise, there is technically a deemed disposition at the time where in your mind you say, as of today, I now hold this property that I've owned for X number of years in trust for my company. Even just having that, making that decision, even though you're not actually registering a transfer, you've disposed of the property. So that's where that problem can come in.
Amazing. I mean, that is like tons of great information in a very short amount of time. I would just say, rewind, go back like 2-3 minutes and re-listen to it a few times, because that is all some really important stuff, and it's complex, right?
But call me. I'm more than happy to have a consultation meeting.
Absolutely. We'll have you let us know how to reach out to you for sure before we end. But I want to go back to your discussion when you were talking about joint ventures and having the conversation with them. If there were like big buckets of like, here's, some of the things to discuss that I'm guessing somebody brand new is like, okay, I want to do this joint venture with this person. Like what do I even need to make sure we're on the same page about? Are there big categories or buckets, number one? And then number two, do you help facilitate that with somebody that's, brand new on like, you want to talk through this, like what are those things?
Absolutely. I have a checklist. So when clients call me and ask for, for a joint venture agreement, and we want to enter into this joint venture, I send you a sort of a checklist. It's almost like a negotiation tool where you guys would sit together as a team and decide and enter the information, right? So it'll ask the relevant questions. big bucket items. So I might miss a few because I don't have my notes in front of me, but it's important to discuss how it's going to run. So of course, the big ticket items that probably everybody comes to the table already having discussed is how much is the investment going to be? How is the ownership going to be divided? And who's going to be the registered owner? So those things are typically already decided, but some things to think about is how is it going to run on a day-to-day? Are you going to meet once a month? Do you meet upon any member deciding to meet? How are you going to maintain and exchange information, right? So I have some ventures where they open a Google Drive and they put all of the account statements, things like that. Another thing, are you going to open a separate bank account just for that joint venture? Or are you going to utilize a bank account in somebody else's name? So all of these things, the day-to-day operations, it's really important to think about those things. Again, I can send a list of things to actually think about that's a little more detailed. Another big item is what happens if one of you can't operate? So what happens if somebody gets sick? What happens if somebody dies? Those are very, very important things to think about. So one of the things that I encourage is to do a power of attorney for property specific to the joint venture, or even nominate each other or one of the other partners. Each person nominates one of the other partners as attorney for power of attorney just for that building or that project, so that if something happens to one of you, you don't end up with an executor, like a family member that doesn't know anything about the joint venture, coming in and having to learn it from scratch, or maybe they're not interested in that sort of thing. It requires a lot more than just, a person owning a building and then what happens? Do we sell it? Do we keep it? Right? So when you're talking joint venture, it's a lot more involved. And then another thing too is if someone needs to get out of the joint venture, if someone needs to be bought out, how are you going to pay for it? What are you going to do? Are you going to force the sale? Are you going to, are you going to get life insurance on everybody to make sure that there's money there so that somebody can be bought out if they pass away? All of those questions are very important. Of course, it depends on the size of the project, right? Because if the project is small enough and all of the investors have enough to buy each other out when the time comes, then life insurance questions are not so important. But depending on the size of the project, those are very important questions.
Thanks for listening to the REITE Club podcast and joining our community of real estate investors online at thereiteclub.com, where the focus is about helping you grow. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks from your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.